She used to explain herself softly, repeatedly, as if clarity could create safety, as if the right tone, the right timing, the right tenderness could teach him how to meet her. She thought if she spoke gently enough, he would hear her. If she cried vulnerably enough, he would care. If she stayed patient enough, he would finally arrive. But he didn't. He arrived only in moments, glimpses of presence, fragments of love, just enough to keep her waiting, but never enough to let her rest. And so she spoke and explained and softened and stayed, not because she was weak, but because her love was vast, because her hope was holy. But there comes a moment in every woman's life when her nervous system gives up before her mind does, when her cells stop believing in his potential, when her soul no longer waits for permission to be whole. She doesn't scream, she doesn't threaten, she doesn't try one last time. She goes quiet. And this silence is not a game. It is not punishment. It is not manipulation. It is a sacred ending. It is the sound of a woman who has finally decided to stop bleeding for someone else's awakening. This is the story of the woman who stopped explaining. Because her silence was not absence, it was her final answer. She used to beg for clarity in places built on confusion. She asked the same question 1,000 ways. What are we? Do you want this? Why does it feel like I'm the only one reaching? And every time, his answers circled her like fog. Just enough warmth to keep her hoping, never enough certainty to let her breathe. He called it being chill. He said, let's not label it. He told her to trust what they had, but what they had was a cycle of intensity and disappearance. What they had was her overfunctioning and him not ready. What they had was his avoidance wrapped in charm, and what she had was anxiety. Not because she was insecure, but because her body knew clarity is the minimum. Now she doesn't chase answers. She listens for coherence. She watches how presence sustains or vanishes, because real love doesn't need to be decoded. It just speaks, and it stays. She confused his silence with depth until hers became louder. He was quiet, mysterious, elusive, and she mistook it for depth. She thought maybe he was thoughtful, maybe he was healing, maybe he was scared to love again. So she filled the space between them with her voice, her reassurance, her emotional labor. She sent long texts. She asked the hard questions. She tried to make it easy for him to open, but he never did. Because he wasn't deep, he was unavailable, and her effort became the bridge he never had to build, until one day, she stopped talking, not in anger, not in strategy, in grief, because she realized her silence had become more honest than all the words she ever gave him. She mistook his indecision for complexity. He said he was confused, that he needed time, that he wasn't sure what he wanted, so she gave him time. She waited. She offered space without walking away. She kept herself emotionally available, just in case he chose her. And he liked that. The access, the comfort, the knowing that she would stay near even when he couldn't commit. But now, she sees the truth. Indecision is not depth. Confusion is not complexity. Avoidance is not emotional intelligence. It's immaturity. It's fear dressed up as honesty. It's a way to hold power without accountability. Now she knows the man who is ready for her won't need to figure it out. He'll already know, and if he doesn't, she no longer waits for him to. She tried to be patient, but patience turned into self-betrayal. At first, she believed her patience was love, that giving him space, time, understanding was proof of her devotion. She told herself, he just needs to heal. He's been through a lot. He'll come around. But one day she realized her patience was not love. It was abandonment of herself. Every time she paused her own needs to hold space for his uncertainty, she taught her body that her pain could wait. that her voice could wait, that her joy could wait, but her soul was tired of waiting. Now, she is no longer patient with patterns that drain her. She doesn't mistake potential for promise. She doesn't extend timelines for someone else's avoidance, because she deserves love that's ready now, not someday, not maybe, now. She tried to explain her needs to someone who wasn't listening. She said what she needed. Clearly, kindly, repeatedly, consistency, communication, presence, depth, honesty, reciprocity, and he nodded, said he understood, said he'd try, but nothing changed. Because he wasn't listening, he was stalling, he didn't want to meet her needs. He wanted her to stop asking. Now, she no longer explains the basics of emotional maturity. She no longer teaches love to grown men. She no longer pleads for things that are supposed to be foundational. Her needs are not too much. They're simply not for those who refuse to rise. 6. She once believed her silence would be noticed. When she finally stopped texting first, she thought he'd reach out. When she stopped checking in, she thought he'd ask where she'd gone. But he didn't. He didn't notice her absence, because he never truly felt her presence. He loved the version of her that was always available, but he was never present enough to recognize her leaving. And that was the answer she never wanted to hear. Now, she no longer breaks her silence to soothe someone else's comfort. She lets the silence speak. Because when someone cannot feel your absence, they never truly honored your presence. Her silence became the mirror he couldn't avoid. At first, he thought she was being dramatic. Then he thought she'd come back. Then he realized she was gone. Not physically, energetically, emotionally, spiritually. She was no longer waiting for his words. She was no longer checking his cues. She was no longer orbiting his uncertainty. She had stepped out of the pattern, not with a goodbye, but with silence. And in that silence, he finally met the echo of everything he refused to hear, because silence is not absence. It is echo. It is memory. It is the weight of every word left unsaid. And now, she doesn't need to say a thing, because her silence isn't the beginning of distance. It's the end of illusion. It's not an invitation, it's the closing of the door, not slammed, not locked, just no longer open. He didn't know her silence was her final answer, but now he does. Her silence didn't begin as strength. It began as surrender, as exhaustion, as the final exhale after years of over-explaining, over-functioning, over-loving. But something happened in the quiet. She began to hear things she couldn't when she was speaking. The voice beneath the noise, the ache beneath the longing, the truth beneath the trying. She stopped editing herself to be digestible. She stopped narrating her pain to be palatable. She stopped breaking herself into softer pieces just so someone else could feel comfortable. And in that stillness, she finally heard the one voice that had been waiting her whole life to be heard, her own. This is not just about letting him go. This is about reclaiming everything she gave away while waiting to be seen. Her silence turned into a sanctuary. At first, the silence felt heavy. It echoed too loud. It pressed on her chest. It made her question if she was doing the right thing. But then the weight shifted. The silence became soft. It began to hold her. She started waking up without anxiety, started breathing without bracing, started remembering what it feels like to be in a room without tension. What began as absence became arrival. She wasn't just away from him. She was home in herself. And the more she listened, the more she realized peace was never supposed to feel like a loss. Until she began to recognize what presence really feels like. He was around, but he was never with her. He could hold her hand, but not her heart. He could look into her eyes, but not into her soul. He could say the right things, but his energy was always somewhere else. And she thought if she just stayed close enough, his presence would deepen, but it never did. Now, She recognizes presence not by proximity, but by resonance. She feels it in the way someone pauses, in the way they stay through silence, in the way they ask, not to reply, but to receive. She no longer settles for bodies that arrive when souls refuse to. Her silence awakened her anger, and she let it burn. When she stopped talking, the first sound she heard wasn't peace, it was rage. Buried rage, quiet rage, the rage of every ignored boundary, every invalidated truth. Every time she silenced herself to keep the peace, it rose through her like a tide, not to destroy her, but to cleanse her. For the first time, she let it move. She didn't dress it in forgiveness. She didn't rationalize it. She didn't spiritualize it. She let it roar in her journal, in her breath, in her dance, in her tears, because this wasn't bitterness, it was resurrection. And the woman who has let herself rage is no longer afraid of her fire. She knows now, anger is not the opposite of love. It's the boundary that protects it. She stopped begging to be chosen and started choosing herself. She used to wonder if he would ever pick her, if he'd stop keeping her as an option, if he'd finally see what she was offering, the devotion, the loyalty, the heart wide open. But he never did. Because he wasn't looking for someone to honor. He was looking for someone who wouldn't leave, no matter how little he gave. And for a while, she stayed, hoping her consistency would inspire his clarity. But now, she no longer prays to be chosen. She chooses. She chooses peace over potential, truth over tension, alignment over attachment. She no longer competes, no longer waits, no longer negotiates with her own intuition, because she realized if you have to beg to be chosen, you've already betrayed yourself. She let go of the version of herself that begged for breadcrumbs. It wasn't just about letting him go. It was about letting go of who she became around him, the overthinker, the overgiver, the overachiever of emotional labor. She saw how small she'd become, how quiet, how careful, how much she tiptoed around his disinterest, hoping he'd mistake it for loyalty. She loved him, but she abandoned herself to do it, and that version of her, she grieved her hard, but she also promised never again. Never again would she shapeshift for closeness. Never again would she twist herself to be kept. Never again would she wear someone else's silence like it was her fault. Because now she knows the woman who stays small to be loved will never feel safe, and she didn't come here to be palatable. She came to be free. Her silence became a boundary no one could cross. She used to set boundaries with words, explaining, justifying, soothing the discomfort of those who broke them. But now, her silence is the boundary. She doesn't argue. She doesn't explain. She doesn't announce the consequences. She simply exits. Because her nervous system is no longer up for debate. Because her peace is not a negotiation. Because her healing is not a round-table discussion. She doesn't need him to understand why she left. She doesn't need anyone to agree with her process. Her silence holds the truth. I see you. I see me. And I no longer choose this dynamic. She realized closure is not something you receive. It's something you become. For a long time, she waited for closure, for an apology, for accountability, for a conversation where everything would make sense. But that conversation never came, and she stopped expecting it, because sometimes closure is not words. Sometimes closure is not clarity. Sometimes closure is not mutual. Sometimes closure is this: you stop needing someone else to release you, because you finally release yourself. She no longer rehearses what she would say if she had one more chance. She doesn't look back with ache. She looks back with understanding, and that is enough. She is not waiting for the ending to feel right. She is not waiting for the past to validate her growth. She carries her own closure now, in her body, in her breath, in the way she walks without needing to be seen. Because the most final answer is not spoken, it is lived, and she lives it now, every day. In the echo of a silence that no longer aches, it radiates. Her silence is no longer the pause between heartbreak and closure. It is the new language she speaks, not because she has nothing to say, but because she no longer needs to translate her truth into smaller syllables for someone who only listened when it was convenient. Her silence is not the absence of connection, it is the fullness of self. She no longer sees it as a gap. It is the whole, the sanctuary, the final statement. And from this place, she begins again not with him, with herself. These are the final 7 integrations of the woman who stopped speaking and started becoming. Her presence now speaks louder than her history. She doesn't tell stories about the woman she used to be. She doesn't need to explain who she outgrew or how many times she almost broke in silence. She doesn't define herself by her survival anymore. Her story lives in how she moves, in how calmly she says no, in how slowly she chooses, in how peacefully she leaves. She is no longer the woman explaining her worth. She is the woman living it. And when she enters the room, you don't hear her voice first, you feel her boundaries. She no longer builds intimacy on explanation, she builds it on resonance. She used to overshare as a way to feel close, thinking that if she poured enough of her story out, someone would pour presence back in. But now, she shares less and listens more deeply. She doesn't need to be understood to feel connected. She doesn't need to confess every detail of her healing to feel seen. She's learned that intimacy isn't built by volume, but by vibration. Now, if it doesn't feel sacred, she doesn't offer access. If it doesn't feel clean, she doesn't open. Her truth is no longer for everyone. It's for those who can hold it with reverence. Chuck, she reclaims joy as her native language. Her silence gave her many things: peace, space, boundaries, clarity, but more than anything, it gave her back her joy, joy without performance, joy without explanation, joy without attachment to anyone else's reaction. She laughs now with her whole body. She plays, she dances, barefoot in the middle of the day for no reason. She sings badly and loudly and fully because she no longer believes she has to earn lightness through enough darkness. Her joy is not a reward. It is her essence, and the more she honors it, the more she heals what was never hers to carry. She chooses relationships where silence is safe, not dangerous. She used to fill every silence with apology. She thought if things got quiet, it meant something was wrong. Now, she craves it in love, in friendship, in intimacy. She knows if someone cannot sit in silence with you, they do not know how to sit with themselves. She chooses people who pause, who breathe, who let the sacred emerge between words. Her heart no longer leaps at loud gestures. It opens in the calm. She doesn't need noise anymore. She needs presence. She no longer entertains energy that pulls her back into performance. She can feel it now, instantly, the energy of proving, of pleasing, of let me make myself smaller so you'll feel safe. And she no longer dances with it. She does not return to dynamics that require her to shrink. She does not flirt with conversations that diminish her clarity. She used to enter rooms wondering if she belonged. Now, she walks in knowing if the energy demands I abandon myself, it is not sacred, and she only answers to what is sacred now. She recognizes that her silence reshaped the room, even if they never say so. He may never admit it, but her silence rearranged something in him. It exposed the gaps. It highlighted the patterns. It made him look at his reflection without distraction. He may never call, may never apologize, may never say, "You were right." But she doesn't need it. She didn't go quiet to be heard. She went quiet to be free. And even if he never says a word, the shift happened. Because when a woman stops trying to be understood, the world begins to notice what it lost. Kay. Her final answer became her new beginning. There was a time when silence meant ending. Now, it means beginning, not of a new relationship, not of a performance, but of a life where she is no longer half present, half claimed, half spoken. She no longer lives in conversations that require her to convince. She no longer measures her softness by how well it's received. She speaks when she wants to. She loves when it feels true. She answers only to what aligns, because she is no longer the woman waiting for someone to notice she's gone. She is the woman who walked herself home. And the world she builds now, from her body, her breath, her brilliance, does not require permission. Her silence wasn't punishment, it was prophecy. It was not the pause before the next man. It was the prayer before the next self. And now she is living it, fully, finally, forever.